The Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway 7F280 was a small but distinctive class of 11 steam locomotives built specifically for heavy work over one of the most difficult mainline routes in Britain. Designed under Henry Fowler's direction for the company, they were intended above all for heavy coal, mineral and goods traffic over the steeply graded Bath extension, but their strength later made them useful on heavy passenger trains as well, with 6 being built by the Midland Railway at Derby in 1914 and 5 more by Robert Stephenson & Co. at Darlington in 1925. They passed from Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway ownership into London, Midland and Scottish Railway stock in 1930 and then on to British Railway stock after nationalisation in 1948, remaining in use until withdrawals between 1959 and 1964, with 2 surviving into preservation. The background to the class lay in the particular operating conditions of the Somerset and Dorset route, with the line linking Bath with the Dorset coast, and carried important mineral traffic from the Mendip district, including coal from the Radstock area and stone from the Vinegar and Shepton Mallet area, with these loads having to be worked over long climbs and sharp descents, with gradients as severe as 1 in 50 and a summit at more than 800 feet above sea level. The Midland Railway, joint owner of the Somerset and Dorset with the London and South Western Railway, was responsible for locomotive policy and supplied mainly standard Midland types, including 440s for passenger work and 060 tender and tank engines for goods traffic, but the Midland's general preference for comparatively small engines left the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway short of the concentrated power needed for the Mendip banks. M.H. Ryan, the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway locomotive superintendent, repeatedly pressed Derby for a locomotive better suited to the line's combination of heavy mineral trains, steep gradients, tight curves, and single-line working, and the early thinking at Derby included 2 080 proposals drawn up in 1907, but these were rejected as too heavy. The eventual solution was a special design outside the Midland Railway's normal small-engine policy, with James Clayton, a Derby draftsman working under Fowler, producing a locomotive unlike standard Derby practice of the period, a 280 mineral engine with a leading pony truck to distribute weight, 4 coupled axles for adhesion, outside cylinders, and Volschart's valve gear. The leading truck reduced axle loading sufficiently for the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway, while the 8 coupled wheels gave the adhesive weight needed for heavy unfitted goods trains over the Mendips, and the design was consequently a route-specific machine rather than a general Midland Railway goods engine. The first 6 engines, numbers 80 to 85, were built in the Midland Railway workshops at Derby, with construction beginning in 1913 and deliveries taking place during 1914, with number 80 reaching Bath on March 1st of that year, and number 85, the last of the batch, arriving by the end of that year. Each cost around £3,500 and were painted in unlined black with raised brass numerals on the cab side sheets, with these engines being the first Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway locomotives to have outside cylinders and Volschart's valve gear, with their 2 outside cylinders measuring 21 inches by 28 inches, and because of their large diameter, they were inclined at 1 in 12 to clear platform edges. The principal dimensions of the first batch reflected both power and route limitation, with the coupled wheels being 4 foot 7.5 inches in diameter, the pony truck wheels were 3 foot 3.5 inches, and the tender wheels were 4 foot 3 inches, and the total engine wheelbase was 25 foot 9 inches, with an adhesive wheelbase of 17 foot 6 inches, and the tender wheelbase was 13 foot 9 inches. The boiler was the Midland G9AS type, broadly related to the boilers used on the Midland compound 440s, with a straight-top bell pair firebox, a boiler pressure of 190 pounds per square inch, a grate area of 28.4 square foot, and a superheater. The boiler barrel was 11 foot 11 inches long, with a mean diameter of 4 foot 9.5 inches, and the centre line stood at 8 foot 10 inches above rail level, while heating surface on the first batch was around 1,170 square foot in the tubes, 151 square foot in the firebox, and 360 square foot in the superheater. In working order, the engine weighed around 64 tons 1500 weight, with 56 tons carried on the coupled wheels, and with the tender, the total was around 108 tons 1900 weight, while the tender capacity itself was 3,500 gallons of water and 7 tons of coal, and the rated tractive effort was around 35,900 pounds when calculated at 85% of the boiler pressure, later commonly quoted as around 35,295 to 296 pounds after changes including tyre diameter. The design included several features dictated by the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway's geography and method of working, with the locomotives being too long for some of the line's turntables when introduced, so it was expected that they would spend much of their time running tender first, and for that reason, the first 6 were provided with tender cabs, and Whittaker tablet exchanging apparatus was fitted to both sides of the tenders, while the brake equipment was unusually comprehensive, with 3 steam brake cylinders being fitted to the engine, 2 acting on the front faces of the 3 rearward pairs of coupled wheels, while the third acted on the rear faces of the leading coupled wheels, and also worked clasp brakes on the pony truck. There was also a brake cylinder on the tender, and this arrangement was intended to give adequate control on long-falling gradients, especially with heavy goods trains whose wagons were often unfitted, while 6 sandboxes were also equipped, originally with steam sanding, applying sand to the leading coupled and driving wheels when running forwards, and to the rear coupled wheels when running in reverse, while Fowler-Anderson bypass valves were provided to ease coasting downhill. In the earliest years of the first 6 engines, several alterations were required, as for a period they were not allowed to use Bath Shed because of weak bridges at the shed entrance roads, and were instead based at Bradstock, where clearance difficulties led to changes including the removal of the chimney lip, flattening of the dome, and removal of the original cab roof ventilators, with the replacement sliding ventilator becoming a prototype for a later LMS pattern. Superheated dampers were removed in 1916 and 1917, the original screw couplings were replaced for a time by 3-link couplings, shorter buffer plungers were fitted, and gravity hand sanding replaced the original steam sanding, while the tender cabs were disliked by the crews, who found them to be drafty, and were removed between 1920 and 1924. The locomotives entered service on heavy mineral and goods traffic between Bath, Radstock, Evercreech Junction and the Mendip districts, with their adhesive weight, braking arrangements and steaming capacity making them well suited to the sharp climbs and heavy trains of the Bath extension, and they reduced the need for double heading by smaller engines. Their value was most evident on slow heavy trains, where a locomotive had to start, lift and control substantial loads over gradients that had previously stretched the Somerset and Dorset's Midland-derived power, and in ordinary service they were associated especially with local goods and mineral work over the central and northern parts of the line, though they later also appeared on heavy summer passenger trains when required. Their success on the Somerset and Dorset led to trials away from the route, but those tests demonstrated the specialised nature of the class, with number 85 being lent to the Midland Railway in 1918 for trials on coal trains between Wellingborough and Brent, with number 88 also taking part in dynamometer car tests on the Tote-and-Brent coal trains in 1926 and 1927, with further testing between Bath and Wellow in 1930. The results did not lead to a Midland or LMS production class for general mineral traffic, while on less severe routes the 7Fs did not show the same advantage, and their consumption of good quality coal made them less economical, where their hill climbing ability was not essential. Traffic on the Somerset and Dorset continued to require more heavy freight power, and the first batch was supplemented in 1925 by a further 5 locomotives, with these being built by Robert Stephenson and Co. at Darlington, and cost around £6,570 each. They retained the same general 280 layout, the same 21-inch by 28-inch cylinders, the same 4-foot 7.5-inch coupled wheels, and the same basic roll, but they differed in important details, most notably being built with the larger non-standard G9BS boiler of a 5-foot 3-inch mean diameter, and with greater evaporative and superheating surface. They used Fowler standard tenders rather than the Dealey pattern tenders of the first batch, had left-hand drive rather than right-hand drive, and were fitted with Lambert wet sanding gear, while their cabs were built with extended roofs because no tender cabs were provided, with the second batch being slightly shorter but heavier, with greater weight on the coupled wheels, and therefore a higher factor of adhesion. The larger boiler engines had a boiler barrel length of 11 foot 11 inches, a 5 foot 3 inch mean boiler diameter, a 9 foot firebox shell, a grate area of 28.4 square foot, and a boiler pressure of 190 pounds per square inch, with their heating surface being greater than that of the first batch, with around 1,323 square foot in the tubes, 148 square foot in the firebox, and 374 foot in the superheater. In working order, the engines weighed around 68 tons 11 hundredweight, with around 59 tons 11 hundredweight on the coupled wheels, and with the tender, the total was around 111 tons 5 hundredweight, with the tender itself carrying 3,500 gallons of water and around 5.5 tons of coal, and the larger boiler gave better steaming capacity and greater adhesive weight, but it also created a standardization problem because the G9BS was not a common LMS boiler type. The LMS period brought further standardization and mechanical changes, with the original Ramsbottom safety valves on the first batch being replaced by Ross-Pop safety valves, screw couplings and longer buffer spindles were restored, and some boiler fittings were altered, while in 1932, numbers 13802 and 804 were experimentally fitted with Carl-Chap-type blast pipe arrangements and larger chimneys, though these were removed in 1934, while under Stanier, the pony truck brakes were removed, Fowler-Anderson bypass valves were replaced by standard stifting valves, new chimneys were fitted, and the stifting valves were at one stage placed above the cylinders before being returned to their earlier position, while just before the Second World War, steam sanding gear was fitted to all 11 engines, together with double-handled regulators and standard LMS sliding firebox doors. One of the most serious events in the class's career occurred on November 20th, 1929, when number 89 was hauling a northbound goods train towards Bath, with the train moving slowly through Combe Down Tunnel, partly because of its load and operating conditions on the climb. As the tunnel had no intermediate ventilation and was known for fume problems, the driver and firemen were overcome by smoke and fumes, and the train continued over the summit before running away on the descent towards Bath, whereupon it crashed in the goods yard outside Bath Green Park. Driver Henry Jennings and 2 railway employees in the yard were killed, with the official accident report, published by the Ministry of Transport in February 1930, identifying the cause as a runaway following the crew being incapacitated by excessive fumes in the tunnel. A major strand of the later development was the replacement of the second batch's larger boilers, with the G9BS boiler being non-standard, and as spare boilers became scarce, the LMS and later BR moved towards fitting the smaller G9AS type used in the first batch and by Midland LMS compounds, with number 89 receiving a smaller boiler after the 1929 Bath accident, while number 90 also received one after boiler trouble around the same period, while the remaining larger boiler engines kept their G9BS boilers much longer, with 53808 being reboilered in 1953, 807 in 1954, and 806 in 1955. The fitting of the smaller boiler to the second batch engines required packing or distance pieces above the original smokebox saddle, except that 53807 later received a one-piece saddle arrangement similar to the 1914 engines, making it the only left-hand drive member of the class with that form of smokebox saddle. During the Second World War, the 7Fs were worked hard as the Somerset and Dorset route carried heavy strategic and ordinary traffic between the Midlands and the South Coast, and by the end of the war the engines were worn, but they remained essential to the route, and under British Railways, they continued to handle their established goods duties, especially on the Bath-Evercreech Junction section, and in the post-war years, they were increasingly useful on heavy summer Saturday passenger trains to and from the South Coast, while their final technical alterations included reboilering, as mentioned, and the fitting of asbestos-based brake blocks, which reduced wear compared with cast-iron blocks and were lighter to handle. The decline of the class was tied to falling freight and passenger traffic, changing regional control, and the wider replacement of steam, with 1958 seeing the Somerset and Dorset route pass to Western Region control, after which the expresses were increasingly diverted away from the line, while road competition also reduced both passenger and goods traffic. Withdrawals began with 53-800 in 1959, followed by 802 in 1960, 801 and 805 in 1961, 803 and 804 in 1962, 810 in 1963, and the remaining 4 second batch engines in 1964, while the Somerset and Dorset route itself closed to through traffic in March 1966. 2 engines survived because they were dispatched to Woodham Brothers scrapyard at Barry, rather than being cut up immediately, these being 53808, formerly number 88, and 53809, formerly number 89, with both members being of the 1925 Robert Stevenson batch, with 53808 being purchased for preservation by the Somerset and Dorset Railway Trust's predecessor organisation after a preservation proposal in 1968, with a price of £2,500 being agreed in 1970, and the locomotive moved from Barry to Radstock before later going to the West Somerset Railway. It was restored from scrapyard condition between 1970 and 1987 and returned to steam in August of that year, and for many years it worked on the West Somerset Railway, before later moving to the Watercress line on long-term hire in August 2020, with its boiler certificate expiring at the end of 2023, and thus leaving it out of service for an overhaul. 53809 was also saved from Barry, restored at Swanwick, and returned to steam in 1980 in LMS identity as 13809, where it worked in preservation throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, later carrying its BR identity of 53809, and after withdrawal for overhaul in 1994, it returned to service in early 2006 in BR Black. In March 2006, it made a symbolic return to the site of Bath Green Park for events marking 40 years since the Somerset and Dorset's closure, with the engine later requiring boiler repairs, before returning again to overhaul in 2016, and moved to the North Norfolk Railway in January 2018 on a long-term operational contract. In 2025, it celebrated its centenary and received a partial repaint into LMS unlined black as 13809, and in early January 2026, it was withdrawn from service for overhaul after the expiry of its boiler ticket. In conclusion, the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway 7F280s were not general-purpose heavy freight engines in the usual Midland Railway sense, but a carefully shaped answer to a particular railway's needs, with their leading pony truck, 8 coupled wheels, large outside cylinders, strong braking arrangements, sanding equipment and boiler development, all reflecting the demands of the Bath extension, where a locomotive had to lift and restrain heavy trains over severe gradients and tight curves. While they were tried elsewhere, their reputation was made on the Somerset and Dorset, where the design strengths were directly matched to the work required, and while their survival in only 2 examples is limited, those preserved locomotives keep visible a class whose importance was much greater than its total of 11 engines suggests.